Coaching is a forward-looking creative process that supports our clients or patients in maximizing their potential personally and professionally.
This is the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast, your guide to giving better nutrition advice. I'm Colleen, a PA and dietitian, and I am so glad to be back in your ears. I took a much-needed break from podcasting in August, but I am so happy to be back and bringing you this episode. I know you guys have been waiting for my conversation with Annie Wildermuth. I'll let her tell you all about her credentials and her educational background, but you are going to love this episode because she is here to help us understand what health coaching looks like in healthcare and how you can borrow some of those coaching skills to deepen your patient connections. But first, before we get into the episode, I'm really excited to share a brand new segment that I'll be doing on the podcast in which I answer questions that were submitted in the Exam Room hotline.
Hi, my name is Penelope. What's the most nutritious food for kids to eat every day but tastes yummy too?
Penelope, I love how you asked this question. You didn't just say healthy or good foods. You asked about foods that are nutritious and taste yummy. And that's really, really important because we should enjoy the food we eat. Now, before I answer Penelope's question, I want to point out that there is no such thing as a, quote, bad food. We need to explain to our patients that all food gives us energy to grow, focus in school, and have fun on the playground. Now, some foods just give us extra nutrients that help with strong bones, muscles, brain development, and keeping us from getting sick. For kids, I like to focus on foods with protein, calcium, iron, and fiber. So Penelope, here are a few fun, tasty, nutritious options that you can try this week. The first one is fruit on a stick with a yogurt dip. You can put your favorite fruits, whatever they are, on a skewer stick and then dip them in a yogurt. My second suggestion are roll-ups. You can try turkey and cheese or a sliced banana with nut butter rolled up into a tortilla. My third suggestion are homemade energy balls. You can mix oats, chia or flaxseed, your favorite nut butter, and a little honey. Now for some extra sweetness, you can use chopped dried fruit or a few chocolate chips. You scoop this up and roll it into a ball, and these are a great, delicious source of iron and fiber. Next is bell peppers with hummus. Now, most kids love bell peppers because they're sweet and crunchy. And did you know that they have more vitamin C than an orange? So they're a great snack for keeping you from getting sick. And lastly is popcorn. This is a great snack that provides a lot of fiber and it tastes yummy too. Thanks again for your question, Penelope. And if you have a question that you'd like me to answer, head over to examroomnutritionpodcast.com and click the black button on the side to leave me a message, and I just might feature it on a future episode. All right, now let's jump into today's episode. Annie, I am so thrilled to have you on the podcast. We connected on LinkedIn a couple months ago, and I've been following you and your journey and your posts, so I am so excited to get to know you better and to just learn more about health coaching in general. So thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Colleen. I am thrilled to be here. I love your podcast and everything you're doing to improve nutrition education for providers and their patients. So excited to start this conversation.
So we have similar paths. We're both dietitians, we're both PAs, but you took it to the next level. And so I traditionally don't ask my guests to kind of share a little bit about themselves or their journey because I really like to get into the meat of the conversation. But I think my audience would be really, really interested to know your path because it is really, really unique. So you went from RD, PA, and now you're a certified leadership and performance coach. So can you just walk us through that journey and then maybe just share what inspired each step of that?
To be honest, I was never the person who knew what they wanted to be when they grew up, really. I grew up with a mom who was really into nutrition, kind of ahead of her time. And I also had food allergies as a kid. So that really inspired me in college to learn more about nutrition and ultimately led me to being an RD. And my career has really zigzagged since then. I became a PA, became a PhD researcher, and then most recently a leadership and performance coach. And all of those career transitions were really in response to wanting to help people in a better way. I would get to a stumbling block in terms of how to help my patients and wanting to do more. Or then when I was working as a PA, wanting to help the next generation thrive in their careers. And so every step that I took was really trying to fill a gap of how I could better serve our profession and our patients and really just all of the people in my life. And so my journey with coaching specifically was really because of a desire to support healthcare workers and patients and athletes in this world that has continuously mounting pressure in it. I felt like I didn't have the tools to necessarily help people the best way that I could. So I decided to get some more training, and here I am.
That is so cool. And I love your heart. And I feel like a lot of people listening are probably nodding in agreement because a lot of us went into this health space, whether it be in medicine, nutrition, to help people, to help them thrive, to live their most vibrant life. And I just love that you kind of continue to learn in different facets. Dietitian, you're the expert in nutrition. PA, the medicine, how to diagnose and treat. And now as health coaching, you can really help to guide and encourage and support patients in such a unique way. Now, health coaches are everywhere. I feel like they're popping up on like every Instagram reel, and it's just booming with health coaches. And you and I had this conversation before I booked you on the podcast, and it was like, I feel like health coaches are kind of the equivalent of like dietitian versus nutritionist, right? There's very distinct education and credentialing on both of those. And so I would love for you to educate me on what does it look like to have a certification in health coaching versus like just a weekend course? Like, how do I know the person in front of me who says they're a health coach had robust training, and maybe like what credentials should I actually look for?
For sure. I do definitely think there's an overlap with us in the nutrition space where those of us who have become registered dietitians with all that rigorous training get frustrated sometimes by the weekend nutritionists or people who just self-anoint themselves as nutrition professionals with no training even at all. And coaching is much the same way. There's a broad proliferation of coaches in every single discipline. And to be honest, some people just label themselves a coach or start a coaching business with no training at all. So keeping an eye out for people who have done rigorous training is really helpful because you know that you're going to get a better product. Coaching is a really distinct profession. And this is something that I've learned more about in going through this journey myself, where the training, which is between 9 months and a year long, if you're doing it at an accredited program, really teaches you how to be a better listener, a better question asker, and how to guide people rather than giving advice. And so what you're looking for is someone who's been through an International Coaching Federation or ICF accredited coaching program. And you know that if they're doing that, they're getting time in the classroom, they're doing assignments, they have to do supervised coaching, much like we would do supervised practice to become dietitians or become a PA. And then you have to complete hours of coaching as well. At the end of that program, if somebody wants to become certified as a coach, they then additionally have to submit a coaching session to an ICF trained evaluator and also sit for a national board examination. And so all of that will leave you with a credential known as the Associate Certified Coach or ACC. And that means you've been through that year-long training program and all those additional requirements that show that you've earned this title of being a coach and really can offer quality coaching to people. There is a separate but still other great pathway as it relates specifically to health and wellness coaching. And this isn't what I did, but it is an option called the National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coaching Program, which leaves you with the credential of NBC HWC. And that is where they're teaching you not only the coaching aspects, but also elements of nutrition, health, and wellness. And so sometimes people who don't have as much of a background in the health and wellness space will pursue that to get both the knowledge piece and the coaching piece together. So keep an eye out for those who've been to an ICF associated program, who are an ACC, MCC, or PCC, or someone who's an NBC, HWC, and those will be great options for quality coaching.
I didn't know any of that. And I think like a lot of medical professionals kind of don't know the difference between dietitian and nutritionist. And unfortunately, if we are utilizing nutritionists more than dietitians, patients might not be getting the care that they deserve. And so I feel like this is such a good comparison of the two because it sounds like a year-long course is something so much more robust and you learn so many more skills and you have that credential and that training to actually help the patients, as opposed to, like you said, like a self-anointed health coach, which I think that's the majority that's out there.
I would agree with you. And that, you know, coaching is something that we need to take seriously because we can really change lives with it. And we want to be supportive with people on their journey and not do harm. We all took that oath as healthcare professionals, and getting good training in this space is really important for that.
I just love that you've continued to learn. And I think it's such a beautiful marriage of nutrition, medicine, now coaching. Like, it is just such a great stack of education and tools that you have. But I'm curious, because I am not a coach. What the heck is coaching exactly? And can you explain to me, how is it different from mentoring, consulting, and maybe just like therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually probably the most common question I get is, great, you're a coach. I want that, but what is it?
Yeah.
And
What do you do?
right, exactly. What is it that you do? So, coaching is a forward looking creative process that supports our clients or patients in maximizing their potential personally and professionally. It's really based on the idea that a client comes with some kind of challenge, and the coach helps them explore that beyond the surface level. So, if you picture an iceberg, a coach asks questions and offers reflections and insight related to what's below the surface of the water in that iceberg that might not be readily apparent to that client. By doing that, they can then make decisions to navigate their own life with a better awareness of how they can achieve their goals in alignment to what's important to them. The reason coaching works so well is because we're not giving advice. And that's the biggest thing that differentiates it between mentoring and consulting. If you think about all the times that you've been given advice in your life and how often that advice is actually useful, it's probably a pretty low percentage. And so coaching does not at all tell people what to do. It's not prescriptive in any way. It helps the client kind of access all of the information they already have in their own brain and in their own life to make informed decisions for them. That being said, there's certainly a role for mentoring, consulting, educating. As clinicians, we're all taught how to educate patients. And I like to think about this as the dispensing of information, which is an important adjunct sometimes to coaching, especially in clinical practice. Coaching gives us the insight into what is shaping our client's experience as it relates to nutrition or food or whatever topic we're talking about. And then we can give them information to help support the choices that they want to make. Therapy is sometimes, actually, my coaching clients will tell me, this feels a little bit like therapy, but what's the difference here? Therapy is a backwards looking process where you're trying to understand why we respond or feel the way that we do and what events in our life caused us to kind of react that way so we can maybe alter our path forward, and certainly administered by a trained therapist or clinician. Coaching is all about looking forward. And so, where do we want to go? And what's the path that we're going to use to get there? So, we really don't dive into that therapeutic or backwards looking realm at all.
That was super helpful. It like just clicked when you had mentioned that about therapy, that it's backwards thinking and seeing how things in your past are affecting present or future. That was really, really helpful. Now, as you were talking, I'm curious if any of your training included motivational interviewing. I use motivational interviewing all the time. I've talked about it on my podcast. My course has an entire lecture on motivational interviewing. So I'm just curious, does coaching training include that aspect of it, or is that something that's different?
Yes, in a sense, not necessarily explicitly labeled as motivational interviewing, but one of the things coaching training spends a lot of time on is how to ask questions to get the most information to help out our clients. And so there's a lot of overlap with motivational interviewing and some of the work that we do around asking powerful questions. That's really the language coaching uses, is powerful questions. And there's definitely some overlap there.
Okay, well, you brought up asking questions, and I am a big proponent of asking better questions to our patients. But in a typical patient visit, we are really, really rushed. If you work in, typical American healthcare, we've got like less than 10 minutes with our patients. But I would really be interested to hear like 2 or 3 coaching style questions that we could use to get our patients to open up, maybe that don't take much more time, or maybe that you found to be really, really helpful in your practice.
For sure. One of the things that I think can help us maximize efficiency when we're in the room with patients is really getting to the root of the problem quickly. And that way, whatever advice we do give or whatever we do offer them, we can do it in a targeted way that will actually help them and make a difference. So this doesn't have to take a long time. So some of the questions that I like to ask are, what's important about this to you? What does success look like to you? And what does accountability look like as it relates to this goal? And usually patients will answer in a couple of sentences, no more than 30 seconds or a minute. But I'm almost always surprised by the answer that I get. And it allows me to really pivot into the direction that they want to go that would help them achieve success in the best way possible. One of the things I've heard you talk about on your podcast before is just the wide range of things that people can do with nutrition and eating to help improve the quality of their life. And we don't have time to address all of that in a 15-minute visit. But sometimes just understanding the little thing about, what's motivating this or what's important about this to you can give us an avenue to give kind of a short piece of advice that might actually help.
I really like that. Now, I'm curious, how do patients normally respond when you ask that accountability question?
Yeah, it can be really broad when I ask them about the accountability piece. One of the things that I think is really important about accountability is that we don't want patients to be accountable to us. We want them to be accountable to something in their own life, themselves, their cat, whatever the case may be, because that'll help take away that kind of shame and judgment aspect if they're not living up to our expectations. It really allows them to decide what's important to them and to work towards that goal. So patients will say things like, I don't need accountability. I know I'll get it done because we've had this conversation. Or I'm going to talk to my spouse about that when I get home so they know that I'm working on it. Or I'm going to write down in my journal the thing that we talked about today. And I'm going to make sure that I check in a week from now, and write something and follow up to that. So it really can be wide ranging in terms of accountability, but a lot of times they wind up choosing to be accountable to somebody else in their life of just sharing about the conversation and telling people that they're working on whatever goal it is. And that can be so powerful for people to build kind of community and support in these areas that they're working on.
Yeah, I want to linger here a little bit. Why is accountability so important to their outcomes or to their success?
Yeah, accountability is really critical in helping people move forward with whatever process that they want to work on. So maybe they're trying to increase their exercise or build in exercise at all. Maybe they're trying to cook one more meal at home during the week. By having an accountability component, they're so much more likely to get it done and actually do this. And again, it's not us telling them that they need to be accountable to us. We're invested in their success for sure, but we want to be there as the supporters and cheerleaders and encouragers in this space. By having it built into their lives in a way that will work for them ongoing, they're much more likely to be able to keep moving on the path that they want to and reach their goals going forward in the future.
Have you ever experienced a patient who maybe has no idea or is kind of lost when you ask them this question? Do you have follow-up questions or do you maybe give 2 or 3 ideas for them to choose from?
Yeah. So I do my best in general with coaching not to give too many ideas. If I am going to give ideas, I usually ask permission first. And I know that you're all in on asking permission about things, especially when it relates to sensitive topics. And accountability can be sensitive for people because it can feel like a little pressure, a little bit of nerve-wracking kind of things. And so what I'll try to do is say, if they can't kind of answer the question right off the bat, or if they don't know what to choose, I'll say, hey, can I offer you an idea? And wait for them to respond. And then say, some of my patients or clients like to have a conversation with someone important in their life about what it is they're working on. Some of them like to write it down in a journal that they're going to keep, every day or something like that. Some of them want to sign up for a class or sign up for an activity, after they leave our session. Others will just build time into their calendar. So you've heard some of these ideas, what might work for you? And so then turning it back to asking another question again about what might work for you. And sometimes that kind of jogs their thinking about different avenues that they could explore as it relates to accountability.
Yeah, I really like that. That actually reminds me of a motivational interviewing technique called ask, offer, ask. And it's just like that, right? That's that permission, offer a few ideas, and then ask them which one sounds good to you or what do you think about that? So I think that strategy can easily be done, even if you're very, very short and limited on time. I think that's a huge takeaway that clinicians can use with their clients. Okay, we've talked about asking good questions, but I'm curious, what other coaching techniques have you learned that maybe a provider could immediately use with a patient this week besides asking some good questions?
So, one of the things that I want to capitalize on, one more thing as it relates to questions, because I think this is something that can really be used in the exam room, and that is to ask what and how questions. The word why can be really polarizing. And I think so often we have framed questions, and we're taught to do this in our training programs to ask, why is it that you're doing this? Or why haven't you? And why comes with judgment. And so, one thing that I like to do is whatever question you're going to ask of your patient, consider asking what or how. So, what about this is important? Or what foods do you like to eat? Or how can you build, preparing this meal into your day instead of, why aren't you planning this mealtime into your day, or why aren't you eating your vegetables, or whatever the case may be. So stick to what and how questions. But the other really great technique that I think can be helpful for clinicians is going back to some of the basics of communication and harnessing the power of silence. We don't have a long time in the room with our patients, but asking a question and then giving them actual time to respond and holding that space for them and silence for them will yield so much more information. And patients often just need a beat to think about it. People do. If you think about all the situations in your life when, people might ask you a question or ask for your input, it's so helpful to have a second to actually think before you respond. I think our humanistic tendency is just to start rambling and talking and offering and going down this path. But if you can take a few seconds, count to 5, and give your patient some space to think, it'll really help support them on their journey.
That is a fantastic piece of advice. And I couldn't agree more with you. I did some studies into how often clinicians, and I think the study was done on doctors, but how often they are interrupting their patient. And it is like, I think the study showed that we interrupt every 11 seconds. And so that's not even just like allowing space to talk at all. Like within 11 seconds, you can't get out all of your concerns, your questions. And so there's an acronym that I've learned that says WAIT. So if you feel like you want to talk as a clinician, just think WAIT. And it's asking yourself, why am I talking? I just love that because it's sort of like a gut check to allow your patient the space to, one, think like you had said, and two, just to share and to, explore and explain the difficulties that they're going through. So I couldn't agree more with you. And I think this leads nicely into the concept of listening, right? Yeah. Most of us as providers, we listen, honestly, as humans, especially in like marital relationships, we listen to respond. We typically don't listen to understand. And so I would really love if you could give us a 3-minute masterclass on effective listening. And what does that look like as a coach? And how can we do that better in the clinical setting?
Listening is so important. And it's one of the things that we spend a ton of time in the coaching programs talking about is how to listen better. And so I'll share some of what they taught us about listening, which is really that there's 3 levels of listening. Most of the time, humans tend to be in level 1, which is listening to respond. And so someone is sharing information with us, and we're already thinking about how we're going to answer that question, or we're thinking about our grocery list or things to do, or our mind is anywhere but on the conversation. So person A is sharing and person B is really not paying attention at all, either thinking about their own response or thinking about something else in their life that's important to them. Level 2 listening is focused listening, where we're listening to the content the person is sharing. So we really are intently listening, but it's really just about the words that they're saying. So if they're sharing with us about nutrition, they're talking to us about what they ate for breakfast that day, if we're doing a diet recall or something like that. We hear the words that are coming out of their mouth and we understand, okay, they've had a banana, they've had oatmeal, they've had yogurt. Great. Level 3 listening, though, is really more global or complete listening. And this is where we're also listening to context. We're listening to body language, tone, emotional atmosphere. So if we take that same example of somebody sharing with us what they had for breakfast that day, we're also listening to the fact that, they ate it in the car because they were rushing to work in the morning after dropping their kid off at daycare. And we can see on their face that they look kind of stressed, or maybe they're a little bit worried that they haven't answered our question in a way that they think will make us happy. Maybe they're worried about it. Maybe the emotional atmosphere is that they feel uncomfortable talking about this. So when I recommend or when I talk to clinicians about how to listen better, we really want to listen at that level 3 level as much as we can, in addition to some time in that level 2 space. So we're listening for content some, but really where coaching comes into play is listening to everything else in the room about what the patient is experiencing while they're sharing that information. So one of the things that can be helpful with this is just to practice it and be mindful of it. So if we're not aware that we're doing this, or that these 3 levels of listening exist, then it's going to be really hard to kind of change our trajectory. So 1, just knowing that this is a thing is really helpful. But 2, it can be really kind of a fun exercise to do. And I use exercise lightly because we're talking about people, but practice it at home with your family, with your kids, with anybody, where you're listening and you're really trying to observe what's going on around the conversation. And then you ask a follow-up question. So instead of listening to respond, you are listening and then pausing, and then you ask some kind of a question to lead to further conversation and more information. So an example of this might be if you're talking to a parent who's worried about a kid who's a bit of a picky eater. If I say something like, I'm hearing you express a lot of worry about your child's picky eating. Can you tell me more about that? Imagine if they then shared with you, oh, well, I know that for me, I was also a picky eater, and it actually really hampered me professionally when I grew up because I didn't know how to eat at work functions because it was not foods that I would normally eat. And I just don't want that for my kid. And it's like, wow, that was totally unexpected. Like now I can offer you something that might, be more aligned with your child's picky eating because I have that understanding. And I wasn't listening to respond as much as I was listening to learn and explore what's going on in your world.
That is so incredible. And I honestly think it could be life-changing for how you practice as a clinician and life-changing for your patients that you take care of, because it's so easy to miss something that's deeper if you are only listening to the words that they're saying, right? And you're just checking a box on your EMR and you're like, done. Okay, asked about nutrition. Let's move on. Asking follow-up questions after you've listened well, I think is such a important strategy. But you're right. It does take practice because it can sometimes feel a little awkward. Like as you were talking, I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I am listening well, and I did listen, like what's next? What do you say next? So I love that example that you said that you had mentioned, like I heard you say. I use a similar phrase that kind of summarizes what they told me, that it's, it sounds like you're saying. So I'm curious if you have any other ideas or shifts that providers could make to become better listeners, or even maybe follow-up questions that can help the conversation move forward.
Yeah. That awkwardness piece is so real for all of us where we're like, ooh, we think we just stepped in it. What do we do now? And there's a lot of different things that I think we can do. One is embodying the mindset of being flexible ourselves. So sometimes we say things that don't resonate with our patients. And if we offer them the ability to correct us or hold that silence or space for them, and then listen to what they have to say, then it'll often just steer us back the right direction. So I like to think about pivoting and really holding it lightly, what my own ideas are, so that people can kind of offer a correction if it's not what they're experiencing. And so I think of myself as a coach as like a master pivoter. So I'll say something like, I'm sensing that you're stressed over adjusting the time of when you're going to eat breakfast in the morning. Can you share more about that? And they're like, actually, I'm not stressed at all. I'm like, okay, that's great. Well, what are you feeling? And so just kind of flipping it back to ask another question and being like, all right, no problem. Like, I don't have to be right in this situation. And so just kind of giving yourself permission to not be right and to ask a follow-up question is really, I think, a great way to navigate those kind of awkward situations.
I really like that you pointed out the elephant in the room, that it can feel awkward. Because when you're learning how to do this, you're totally right. Like it does. You're kind of like, okay, I got this listening piece, but like now what do I do with it? And I really like how you pointed out that you don't have to be right. You just need to make sure that you are on the same page as the patient or as the client, and you're understanding what it is that they're struggling with, or what it is that they would like you to help them with, or any of those things. And then you can move the conversation forward.
Our job is not to fix it for them. And so if we can let go of that being right piece, which we want to be right in a lot of things as dietitians and as clinicians or providers, we want to make sure that we're giving accurate information and being right in that space. But we don't need to be right about the patient's journey or their feelings or emotions or any of those things.
Yeah. And, that moves us nicely into my next question. That's talking about curiosity and being curious as a clinician, not being judgmental or assumptive or even prescriptive. Like you had just said, we better be right when we diagnose pneumonia, and we better choose the right antibiotics to cover that bacteria. But when it comes to food and nutrition, it's more about being curious. And so can you share, what does that look like as a health coach? How do you practically do that?
I really think it's one of the mindsets where we allow ourselves to be surprised by what the patient is telling us, and hopefully we can find some joy in that. So I actually think this relates to listening in a sense of, if we're not listening to respond, then it really opens up space for us to actually be surprised by the answer that we get. And so, for example, that example that I gave earlier about the picky eater, there's a whole lot of different answers we could potentially get about what's important to somebody about why their child is limiting themselves to certain foods or only seems to enjoy certain foods. And so being pleasantly surprised by, oh, this is because of something that affected your life, parents. Here's how we can frame this conversation so you can support your child, yourself, and everyone can leave this conversation in a positive way. I think is really critical to staying curious. Other things that you can do are that ability to pivot. So just kind of letting go if your initial assumption is wrong, asking permission, especially if you're talking about those sensitive topics or things that are challenging, allows you to stay curious and kind of frames to the patient that, you're not going to just jump in and tell them what to do. It's a signal to them that, you really are more invested in what they have to say and how things are going to work in their life. So it's really just about being open to the patient's agenda and their lived experience and how we can support their journey.
I also find that asking the right questions and staying curious is the best way to avoid burnout and to avoid wasting time, right? I always come back to time because it's precious, especially again, if you're seeing 30 plus patients, time is a commodity. And so finding out exactly what it is that's your patient is struggling with and targeting that rather than just coming out, into the room and listing off 3 to 4 ideas and, tips and tricks that maybe have nothing to do with the, staying with the picky eater example, maybe have nothing to do with what the parent was dealing with as a child, right? Maybe the advice that you're giving doesn't help them at all. And so I find that asking those right questions, listening, can help you guide your advice so much better. Would you agree? Have you experienced this?
I completely agree with you. And one of the things that I think builds joy back into our lives as providers is feeling like we're really actually helping somebody. It doesn't take that much time to ask just one really good question to understand our patient, by hearing them out for 30 seconds or something, and then being able to give them targeted advice. And it leaves us with such a satisfaction that we actually addressed part of the problem today of what's, really important and weighing on them and top of mind for them and how it might work in their life. Time is, I think, our most valuable resource as humans, as providers. And so the ability to make that time worthwhile and to leave us with a boost because we really did make a difference in somebody's life is so key.
Time is the patient's too, right? They want to leave the office feeling like they got something out of it too, rather than just 3 more tips or 3 more things on their plate, 3 more things that they're not doing right. If you would just give them one, like you said, one targeted piece of advice that is tailored to what they came in concerned with or what they expressed they were struggling with, they're going to walk out feeling like, okay, I got this. I'm going to work on that one thing rather than walking out with a plate fuller than when they came in with.
I think they also feel heard in that situation. And all of us just want to feel heard at the end of the day. And so not only are they leaving with something actionable that's meaningful for their life, they were able to have someone take a few minutes of their time to really listen to them, understand their life and the challenges that they're facing, and then help them. And at the end of the day, like that is such a powerful thing. If you reflect back on a time that somebody really heard you and was able to kind of, create that space for you, it's so powerful and connecting. And I think it's really rewarding for both the patient and the provider.
100%. I really do believe that coaching is all about connecting. And we're going to come full circle now to something we've talked about a couple of times. And this is probably one of my favorite tips to give to clinicians. And that is the importance of asking permission before you're giving any guidance. And I know you're so passionate about this. This is a priority in coaching as well. But I would love to hear, like, why does asking permission matter? And then how does it strengthen that patient clinician relationship?
I think asking permission is really important because the things that we're helping our patients with are sacred to them. This is their life, this is their health, it's their freedom, and it's their ability to create the life that they want. And so when we're thinking of our own agenda as providers in terms of we need to check these boxes, we need to do all of this preventative stuff, we need to set them up for all of the screenings. Like, yes, that is our agenda and things that we need to manage, but that doesn't necessarily help the patient feel like they're getting the most out of their healthcare visit or healthcare experience. And sometimes we uncover things going through our checklists, or we have to talk about really difficult topics that may be relevant in the moment, may be relevant long term for preventative health, may not even come into effect for quite a ways down the road. The asking permission really is kind of a superpower for us to give the patient autonomy over their healthcare. And so things that I like to do are just say, hey, I noticed this, or I sense that you're feeling worried about this, or this is something that came up on your screening today. Would it be okay if we talked about it? And then actually listen to what they say. Yes, we can talk about it now, or no, I prefer not to. And if they say no, if it's not something that's immediately life threatening to them, then it's okay to let it go. Like, you are offering something to them. And we don't have to change every single thing when a patient is coming in for a visit with us. Like, we're going to do the best that we can to make sure that we're, one, practicing good medicine, practicing good nutrition. But two, like, Rome was not built in a day. It is going to take time to address all of these things. And sometimes patients just need time to think about, am I ready to work on this now? If you think about all the other things that could be going on in the background, they're worried maybe about childcare. Maybe they just lost their job. Maybe, they have a sick family member. Maybe they're just busy with all of the things that life has. It might just not be the right moment to invite them into that conversation. So giving patients the opportunity to opt out is really powerful for them. It goes back to that sense of feeling heard. And what I found is, more often than not, when I actually offer, are you interested in talking about this today? Or would it be okay if we discuss this today? Most of the time people say yes, but they really appreciate it. You can see their whole face light up. They feel just much more relaxed and like they have agency and autonomy over the conversation. And that's really the way to get invited in to talk about some of these really difficult topics.
Gosh, that's been my experience too. I'm in pediatrics and I will do this with every single patient, honestly, like 8 and above. Before I even talk about their growth chart, what foods that they're eating, I always make sure, hey, we're going to start talking about your body and some of the foods that you're eating. Are you comfortable with that today? And I had a mom who got teary-eyed. Her daughter was, I want to say 13 and in a larger body. Mom was in a larger body. And mom was like, no one has ever asked me or my daughter that. And I am like floored that you gave her this opportunity to opt out of this, because I've been uncomfortable in my body my whole life. And it's always been about my weight. And I don't want that for her. Like, she was genuinely so grateful that I just made sure that, hey, everybody in the room okay with this. Might be a little sensitive, but I'm going to help you through it. I'm going to talk to you about with compassion and respect. And I see you and I hear you. And it's so true. Like, it is transforming for them, especially in individuals in larger bodies or even in smaller bodies. We tend to focus on the larger bodied individual, but kiddos and adults who are in smaller bodies often hear the same, similar negativity about their body size in general. And so I find that that is such a great way to have such high respect and rapport with your patient.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up a great point that, we can often make assumptions about, this only applies to larger bodied individuals, if we're talking about weight. But everybody experiences the world and certain stressors in a different way. And so asking permission, whether it be related to weight or any number of topics, gives people just so much more control over their own healthcare and their own visit. And I find that they're genuinely appreciative.
All right. I want to hear, how do you respond when a patient says no? Like, I don't want to talk about my weight. I don't want to talk about whatever it is that you had asked permission for, because I feel like maybe clinicians will get stuck. Like, I 100% agree. If they say no, you need to respect that and move on. But what do we say? Like, how do we move on from that?
I think we have to let go of the kind of feelings that we're not doing our job if we don't dispense that information. So some of it is an internal management of like, we just have to let it go. They said no, like no is an answer to a question and we need to move on. And so what I like to say is, okay, that sounds all right. And then move into, would it be okay if we talked about this? Or would it be okay if we talked about next steps? And usually the patient wants some kind of closure to the visit. So I like to follow it up with, okay, like I acknowledge this and let's talk about what's next. And that what's next might be, can we schedule a follow-up visit in a month to revisit some of what brought you in today, or to revisit your blood pressure or whatever the case might be, and move forward that way. But really just pivoting to something that the patient is comfortable with. And hopefully we've gotten a sense of that throughout the patient visit, like what is kind of a safer area for them to talk about and what is really important to them about the visit. And then we can kind of pivot back to that and focus our efforts there and close things out.
Annie, thank you for letting me pick your brain today. I am so passionate about this topic, but I've just enjoyed your wisdom and all of the tips that you've provided today. So I know my listeners are going to want to connect with you and learn more from you. So where can people hang out with you online?
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely great to be here. I love talking about how we can improve our communication with our patients, our colleagues, and everyone else who is important to us in our lives. So it's been really great. You can find me online at www.firstrowleadership.com. I do all sorts of different coaching, leadership coaching, sports performance coaching, and then health and wellness coaching as well. So all of my coaching resources are there. I'm also on LinkedIn under Annie Wildermuth, and I'm on Instagram at Annie the PAC. So any of those places, I would love to connect with you to talk about coaching, leadership, or your professional journey as a dietitian or a PA.
I will link to all of that down below. Go follow Annie. All of her content is so valuable. And if you want Annie back on, send me a message at Exam Room Nutrition on Instagram, and we can further go into deeper conversations all about helping our patients and learning how to be a better coach for our patients. Annie, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Colleen. This was great.